Hello and welcome at Book Lovers Companion. My name is Edith, and right next to me again is the chattering teacup.
Hello.
Hello, teacup. After all your tea things and being under the weather, you are back again in your chair.
Yep.
Feeling better already?
I do.
Splendid. And here with us is returning guest Daniel Bautz. Daniel, hello and welcome back on the show.
Thank you so much for having me back on the show. I'm glad to see teacups on the mend and glad to see both of your smiling faces. So it's great I'm ecstatic to be back on the show with you.
And so are we. It's lovely to have you back on the show. And we are here to talk about your very new book, fresh from the press. It came out in September, Aristotle, James and the Phantom Funeral Coach. It's the perfect Halloween read. So, Daniel, tell us all about this book, without giving too much away, of course.
So this is the book that got me started writing seriously. I know this isn't the first book I published, but this one is like near and dear to my heart. It's about a boy and his dog and the adventure that they go on after stumbling onto a local legend and finding that there's much more underneath the surface than what the legend originally had them thinking. So that's the 10-second pitch there.
And the age group you wrote this book for, it says on Amazon 8 to 12 years old.
Yeah, it focuses around a 12-year-old boy, and it's a middle grade book. And so it's a little bit toned back from my other works. But this is really an audience that I want to engage, because I feel like we can't lose literacy by not having books that kids would want to read. And I'm hoping that kids want to read this. And the feedback that I've gotten from children is that they absolutely love it.
Okay, and so do the adults, I have to tell you.
It's captivating.
Here too.
You want to continue reading, definitely.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And the teacup posed an interesting question when we spoke about this book. How many childhood memories are incorporated in this book?
So out of all the things that I've written, this is the most autobiographical. What inspired this book was I had a dog that actually in my adult life that was around during a very bad part of my life. And his presence in my life actually kind of pulled me out of that depression and I don't know, and in a way saved my life. And so after he was no longer in my life, I missed him very dearly. And the writing of the book was somewhat therapeutic for me in the fact that I got to, at least in my mind, spend more time with the dog. The dog's name was AJ, which is what the dog's name is in the book. And it's based in the town that I grew up in. It's also, there's a lot of autobiographical touches in this. Obviously, it's more fantastical than real life, but if you don't like Aristotle, you're probably not going to like me very much, because I feel like this is the character that I wrote that it was probably most like myself.
Yeah, he's a very nice young boy.
I have to say, I really liked the part where you explained how AG got his name. And
that's awesome.
Because I could really picture it in my head. The way you start a book with this campfire and so on, is it really something that's happening a lot with these scary stories and so on in the night?
Very much. A lot of the, I know when I was in Scouts, and we had this amazing storyteller. One of our Scout leaders, one of the other Scouts' father, he would had a ghost story for everything. He actually was a park ranger. And whenever we got out and camped together overnight with him, he would always have like the greatest stories to tell. And actually, it's because of him that I discovered the story, The Monkey's Paw. That was the one that stuck with me. I didn't use that one, but he was a big part of the basis for that troop leader, Barry, because I remember that very clearly, and it's a childhood memory that sticks with me and is very vivid to this day, sitting around the fire, hearing him tell the stories and the craft of storytelling that inspired me even as a young child to kind of look more into the spooky stuff and things like that.
What do you think is it that fascinates children so much about spooky stories?
I think it's the same thing. It's just the human condition. I think that we're looking for explanations for, why things happen. And as we're younger, we're trying to form an idea of what the world is. We're kind of unsure. And so the unknown kind of draws us in. It's a safer way to explore what we don't understand about the world. And so even if it's just a story, even if it has a happy or not a happy ending, it's a safe way to explore that space without actually putting ourselves in peril.
Mm-hmm. That's why we all also love to watch horror movies or something like that. I mean,
I don't understand that.
Come on, I went to school with someone who, he and his family always went to Italy during the summer, spent their time at the beach, and he always did watch Jaws before they went on holiday.
I would have never gone into the water.
Yeah, neither have I, but, some people just like the thrill of it.
I think that's another thing too. It gives you a thrill, but again, when you close the book or you turn off the movie, you're not in the water. You're not on the beach. You're not in a 25-foot shark's mouth. You're
Not
on your
yet.
couch, your chair, or in your bed. I mean, yeah, when you're kind of tempting fate when you go to the beach, but after watching it, it almost feels like there's a level of irony that the world would almost want to make happen.
Absolutely. I mean, back then there wasn't the danger of falling prey to a shark. These days, even in the Adriatic, there's a good chance.
It's definitely more likely.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow.
Some parts.
Because of the climate change, you can also find sharks in this kind of waters.
I don't know about the Mediterranean, but in some parts of the world, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also the Mediterranean.
Really?
Yeah. And
That's interesting.
yeah, and scary, to be honest.
Yeah.
I stay in the swimming pool.
That's probably the best place to go swimming.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you mentioned it's the most autobiographic book so far. And it seems to me the town you describe, the small town, and it sounds very idyllic. And also Aristotle's parents, they are wonderful parents. They support their son. They believe what he tells them. They don't side with the other adults, for example, with the principal or the teachers.
And that was the experience that I had growing up. My parents were fantastic people. I couldn't have been more blessed with more wonderful parents, very supportive. I mean, not that they didn't have to discipline me, not that I didn't put them through grief, but whenever the chips were down, I could count on them I can count on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I still can to this day. So that's kind of, that's the experience that I had growing up. So, I mean, as an 80s kid, of course, was a latchkey kid, and I did ride my bike everywhere, and, things happen. You got to call your parents. They got to come pick you up. If you bike 20 miles away and you got lost, those things happen. But, even if they were mad, they still came and got me. So, very much part of my growing up.
Yeah.
As you just mentioned, reading this book as someone who experienced the 80s, it was nice to find these references to it.
That's awesome.
I mean, our experiences were probably the same. I mean, like you said, the 80s, it was more carefree. As children, we could do more. We were freer in a way.
Oh, absolutely. We didn't have the helicopter parents.
Yeah.
We didn't have cell phones. So, there was a lot more leeway to kind of sneak off and do things that maybe you didn't have permission to do. Like I said, like one of the central things in the story is Aristotle lies to his parents and sneaks back to the campsite, and, everything goes from there. But, and that's one of the fears that he has to deal with. He realizes at some point that no one knows where he's at, except because he didn't tell him, because he hid it.
Yeah, but he had his best friend with him, so it was also a safer place for him to sneak away with
He
his
felt
best
safer.
friend, AJ.
Yes, that's true. So it's I don't know. I think you're right about the 80s was a lot more carefree, and I kind of feel like it should be more so that now that we have like the devices where we can track the kids and all that stuff, but it just isn't.
Yeah, it's strange, isn't it?
I think back then children had to use their imagination much more because I mean it's just a rural area, but what happens in the imagination powers the stories you play out. Whereas nowadays, I think they probably use more technology for that.
I think you're 100% right on that. I unfortunately, we haven't done the things necessary to kind of engender that kind of imagination and exploration of imagination, and we've replaced the fun of play with devices. Even the interpersonal thing. I know kids still get together. I know they still, enjoy each other's company, but at the same time, they're not always going to spend the night over at someone's house because they can just FaceTime them. So they don't get to experience, other households or other the differences between families and things like that as well. So I don't know. They don't get to expand their horizons in the same way with a kind of an immersive experience where you're literally in that environment.
And we did enjoy doing the forbidden. You didn't, Teacup.
What forbidden?
Smoking.
Yeah, we did it, but in the afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. Not at school. Never at school. Yeah, in the afternoon when we met.
Never.
Yeah, we wouldn't do that. That's simply not true.
No, never.
Not at school. Like you said, in the afternoon when we met with friends and so on. And the question was always, who's going to buy the cigarettes? Yeah, well,
The one who looked the oldest?
Yes, exactly. Absolutely. And the town you grew up in, was it really that idyllic as it is mentioned in the book?
Looking back, growing up in it, I didn't think so. But, looking back, it definitely was a great environment to have grown up in. Was it as idyllic? No, it's a little bit more human, but it definitely was a community where people knew one another, people helped one another. And you could walk into a store and you're going to know the guy at the grocery store. You're going to know, the people at the school. You're going to know the people at the diner. It was I want to say my entire school system was like 650 kids from kindergarten all the way up to 12th grade. So that's the entire, primary, secondary school.
Mm-hmm.
That was everybody, from 5 to 18.
Mm-hmm.
So you knew everybody and everyone knew you. And if you got in trouble, people did come and help you.
That's true.
If you were from out of town, you might not have had the same kind of experience. But if you were from town, you definitely were part of something more bigger than yourself.
Yeah, true. It's also the case when you grow up in a village, for example, here in Austria.
I didn't, so I don't know.
Yeah, you didn't. You grew up in a big, bad city. I know. Vienna. Although it's not the big, bad city. Big. No, not so much. Bad. Who knows? Aristotle also has another adult on his side, his uncle.
And that is, how they say, not every, the whole, always the disclaimer in the front of the book. That is literally based off my great uncle Raymond. He ran a clock shop. He worked on watches, and people would come and bring him the knickknacks, and he was absolutely obsessed with Don Quixote. So 100%, that's my Uncle Raymond, my great Uncle Raymond. But since he's passed on, I felt it was a good way to kind of pay some sort of homage to him and the impact that he had on my young childhood.
There's also this scene where Aristotle is confounded and surprised when he's going and do some research about everything that is going on, and he wants to find out who sent some flowers. And it astonishes him that you can't find out who sent flowers, but you can find out who owns which parcel of land.
And if you put it next to each other, it's really confounding.
It is.
But it is.
Yeah, it's one of those things where I was like, as I was writing it, because that was supposed to be the note from the florist is a breadcrumb that's supposed to kind of lead you deeper down into the mystery. And I was like gonna, have him go, but then I realized like, no, they're not going to give away that information. That's a privacy issue.
Yeah.
But strangely, if it's property, if it's got taxes attached to it, that's all public record, and you can find out so much information. I don't know if that's how it is in Austria, but here in the United States, you can, but you'll never get the information about who bought this if they didn't give you that information. It's a privacy issue, and I thought that was still confusing to me, because really, what harm can you do with that information? But
yeah, it's the same here in Austria.
Yeah,
you can also find out who owns what, and it's the right for everyone to look it up.
Because it's public record.
It's public record, yeah.
Yeah. This is crazy to me, really. After thinking about it, it's like, I think there should be some layer of protection there, but there really isn't.
Yeah, no, there isn't. Except maybe if you have a sort of big company where one company owns the other, and so on and so on and so on, and you have to dig deeper maybe, then it gets harder. If it's not a private person.
I think if it's real estate, it's public record who owns that.
Yeah.
But who owns different companies, I think, in the company registry.
Yeah, yes, true, but it can also become difficult.
And you have to pay to get all the information, but then you can get it, I think.
Yeah.
Restrictions.
True. Yeah. And what about these myths and stories that were told at the campsite that started Aristotle on his quest? Is this something you've heard yourself as a young boy, or
did you come up with it?
I just came up with it. So the Boy Scout camp I always went to, and I didn't use the word Boy Scouts because I know it's a trademark and all of that. So I just said Scout camp. But the Boy Scout camp I went to was always called Avery Hand. And I just kind of extrapolated that out from there to kind of give like a nice spooky story. I mean, it should ring somewhat true historically, because I mean, I do understand the history of the area, but it's a complete fabrication. I think the inspiration for that comes from the movie Darby O'Gill and the Little People. I don't know if you're familiar with that at all. An old Disney film with Sean Connery in it. So it's set in Ireland. It's about a guy who captures the king of the leprechauns, and it deals with all these Irish myths and legends. And at the end of it, he is picked up by a phantom coach. And that's kind of always stuck with me when watching childhood. So that's the inspiration for the coach itself, but the story is a complete and utter fabrication. That comes 100% from my imagination.
Okay. I mean, one of the characters in your book, let's call that character the baddie, the villain.
Yes.
Without giving too much away, we found, or you said, Teacup, that actually this character is actually a tragic character. Not completely 100% bad, but rather tragic.
Well, I think that's, for me, I don't like the kind of 100% bad. I mean, I think you start off, probably when you're really introduced to them as the main villain, you probably think that they are just the most horrible, horrifying thing. But by the end of the book, you should begin to understand that there's more depth to it than just that. And then not every path to being a villain, and almost no paths to being a villain or a bad guy, are from a person looking to be bad. Everyone, I think, you can get misguided. You can get off the path of doing what's good and right. And you can convince yourself that doing bad things are good as long as the ends justify the means. And I think that's how most people end up doing bad things, is they think they're right, they think they know, and they're willing to do some bad things in order to, in their mind, bring about a good thing. I think that's a very real human condition. Again, I think nobody who's the bad guy thinks they're the bad guy.
Yeah, they have their reasons, and somehow they forget what they're actually doing or don't see what they're actually doing.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. They don't see the actual full impact. They don't see necessarily how it's wrong either. I mean, I just feel like we can't. And I that's also, initially I anticipated a completely different ending for the book, but as I wrote the character, both the characters, Aristotle and the main villain, it became apparent to me it just couldn't be the way I envisioned. It couldn't be like some big battle. It couldn't be some just, I don't know. It needed to have a different ending than what I originally intended. And I hope that it's satisfying to people that read it, because it does always feel like it's building to this different ending than what I give.
Yeah, absolutely. And did I get that right? You intend on making this a series?
Absolutely. I've already written book 2. So that'll come out next fall. And that one is called Aristotle James and the Waking Earth. And it's going to have a different tone. It's going to be, he's 2 years older, and it focuses on him on a camping trip with AJ and his father, and an adventure that unravels around that, because he's trying to move past what happened, this whole adventure that he has in this book. He's trying to like put it away and just be a normal kid. And well, it finds him.
This was something you mentioned in the book, that before that summer, his whole world was the school and the village. But during this summer, he discovers, let's say, the world outside. Let's put it that way. And he somehow thinks it was safer before he knew what can happen, actually. And I think it's a good way to put it, because it really is that way. You're in a safe haven as a child often, especially in such a nice town. And at one point you have to grow up.
Yeah, until that's ruptured. Yeah, until that's ruptured, or you're forced into a situation where you have to like change that viewpoint. I mean, again, like I said, growing up, I felt like I was kind of trapped in that tiny little town, erroneously. Really, it was probably the best place that I've lived, just because of the community and how it like bound together around one another. So looking back, I wanted my world to expand. And now it's like, looking back, I was like, well, that was too much of a rush, because I really should have taken the opportunity to enjoy the safety and the freedom of that community that provided to allow you to explore who you were safely.
Yeah, true. I mean, when we grow up and grow older, our perspective changes again, doesn't it? I mean, when we are teenagers, we feel sometimes stifled by our community, like you mentioned it. But when we grow older, we see the plus sides of living in such a community.
Oh, I agree. And it is something like, I think every child faces it. I know that they use the term come of age, but it's almost like where you start to realize that, the small world that you live in, this kind of insular place that you're protected, hopefully, it's actually bigger than that. And that's just not all of it. And that's a shocking, jarring thing to go through, because you've just figured out where you fit probably inside this small sphere, and then you realize there's a much larger sphere. And so now you again have the struggle of figuring out, where do I fit in this larger space? I guess the book does deal with that to some degree, and it's the crisis that he has to deal with that kind of expands that view for him.
Mm-hmm. And now you mentioned book 2, he is 2 years older and it's a different tone. And someone compared the book or said, move aside, Harry, here comes Aristotle. Do you think it will also move in that direction where it's going to be darker from book to book?
I think so. As the kids hopefully grow with the character, they'll be able to handle a little more, and a little more. I'm not planning on making it, but yeah, I do think it will get a little darker. I mean, especially the end of the second book is definitely not. Again, it will be a little darker. It's not going to be a ton darker. Actually, I think it's more straight adventure than the other one. Than Aristotle. There's less mystery, more straight adventure. But at the end of the book, it's a little darker. It's a little less of a happy ending.
And the book is told in the first person. We experience the whole events completely from Aristotle's point of view. Was that the idea from the beginning to build this intimacy between your hero and the reader?
Absolutely. I wanted any child that picked up the book to be able to see that and experience the world through the main character's eyes, so they could kind of go through it themselves. Mm-hmm. That was completely intentional. That was the only way I could envision telling Aristotle's stories. And I know that does somewhat limit, kind of that, the third person omnipotent and all that, the third person limited is a little bit more expansive for explaining to the reader. I was more focused on understanding that the reader would experience through the eyes of the main character. Mm-hmm. That was my focus.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you think that in young adult fiction, the first person narration is used a bit more often than in adult books to engage them more?
I do believe that's the case. I think there are more first-person perspectives in books for younger readers. I do think it is also that helps them kind of get more engaged with the story quicker, because they'll start to personalize the book if they're enjoying it a lot quicker.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And for yourself as a writer, what were the challenges for you writing adult books and now writing this book for children or teenagers?
So I think I really enjoy writing. I think it's more challenging for me to write for adults, because if you read a lot of adult fiction, strangely, the ideas are a little less expansive. They're a little bit more boxed in, and so is the language. You have more freedom to use language creatively and to introduce more out of the box ideas in a children's book, I think, because they're going to be more receptive to that. And for whatever reason, even when I, read middle grade, young adult, the language is actually more, in my opinion, and people could disagree with me, it's a little bit more advanced than what you would read in adult fiction. Like if you pick up a James Patterson or a David Baldacci or any other like the best-selling authors, the language is very plain. There isn't a lot of huge concepts contained within the books. Like you don't get a wrinkle in time very often unless you're reading like high fantasy or science fiction and popular fiction for adults.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
And concerning the language, as you said, in the second book, he's 2 years older. Is there a lot of difference between the language he used in these two books?
No, there's not. I feel like if they're willing to take the ride along from, they pick up the first book and they're 12 years old, they pick up the next book when they're 13 and so forth, they're going to be comfortable with it. They're actually going to expect it to be similar from book to book. So they're not going to, for me to try and change the way I'm communicating with them through my words, I think would be, I think it would be upsetting to the reader, because I think there's a certain expectation that's set.
Yeah. Do you think that as adults we are less accepting of outlandish ideas? Let's call them outlandish. And children are more open to the most fantastic settings, the most fantastic ideas in books. Do we lose that as adults?
I think maybe not on an individual level, but as a whole, yeah, I think we do. As adults, we kind of tend to get lost in the quagmire of the real world, and we begin to experience the real world. And so things that don't fit within that viewpoint, we're more likely to dismiss it rather than kind of explore it. Where kids, they don't have that kind of set idea of what the world is or what the world should be. So I think they're just more accepting of different ways of looking at the world. So I think you're spot on and kind of even just asking that question. I think as adults, we tend to make decisions, whether we realize we do or not, about what the world should be. And even when we're reading, we have an idea of what will push us outside of that kind of suspension of belief or disbelief.
Isn't it also something that adults try to, during education, tell children to be more serious and leave their
I'm never serious.
Fantastic ideas out of it?
I'm never serious.
In general.
Well, I remember being 12 years old and having the discussion with my mother after 3 or 4 weeks of a science class, and literally saying the sentence, "They're trying to take the magic out of the world." And I think that's kind of not maybe the most accurate way to describe it, but I think when we start giving explanations to things, we kind of pull away the mystique, and there's not that there's not still wonder in the world. It's just our perception of what was once wondrous has changed, and there's less of it as we progress forward.
Maybe it's up to the teachers to show the students the beauty and the wonders, even in science.
And the parents.
And the parents as well, of course. Yeah.
Parents, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's something we spoke about in our Science in Fiction, about the wonders and what you can experience when you also know about science, the beauty of it.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not trying to say that there's no wonder in the world. I'm just trying to say, like, the fantastical begins to get stripped away. Like, the example I always like to use, going back, is I can tell you about a creature. It has gray skin. If you rub the skin the wrong way, it cuts your hands. It has 7 rows of razor-sharp teeth that fall out of its mouth, but it's always replenishing those razor-sharp teeth. If it stops moving, it dies. And it pretty much slowly eats meat. It's a shark.
Shark, yes.
But when I describe just what it is, it's a scary monster. I mean, it peels away a little bit of that scary factor when you kind of put a name to it, you catalog it, and you understand it. And that's kind of what I'm alluding to with, like, kind of stripping away the wonder and the magic out of it. By doing that, it does lose some of that. And as we explain more and more, I think as a whole, we see less wonder in the world. Not that there isn't things to explore, not that there's not things that aren't wondrous, but you start to have to get down to a smaller level to start to see the structure and all of that underpinning everything.
I hold Steven Spielberg responsible for that. Just saying. He has a lot to answer for in this regard.
Sharks agree.
Yes, I know.
He gave him a bad name.
And people who work as marine biologists also agree, I think. Absolutely.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And do you think that The fantasy genre is a way of us adults recapturing also our childhood, a little bit at least.
Oh, for sure. I think that's a very astute thing to point out. I think fantasy, that's the whole reason it exists. It's to kind of recapture that astonishment at discovering new worlds and new creatures and everything that provides you with. The magic, everything.
Mm-hmm. And sometimes we tend to be a bit too critical when we read fantasy. Do you think we use our adult mind sometimes too often when we criticize authors for their ideas of their worlds?
I think if we do that, I think you're right. I think we're a little too critical because, well, they're creating a whole new world. We don't really understand how that works. We don't honestly understand how our world works quite yet. But especially when you extrapolate it out, it's a whole new world. You don't understand how it works. You don't need to be hypercritical, and you certainly don't need to project what happens in this world onto the next. But I think that's just how our minds work. So that's the fantasy writer's job, to kind of suspend our disbelief and put us into that world. And I know that's a particularly hard job, especially in today's world.
I think maybe there's a bit like a tour guide. But you can try to engage your people and take them on the ride, but if they're set against it, there's not much you can do.
I think that's part and parcel why they started creating what they call portal fantasy. Like even like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe would be a portal fantasy. I think that's the term that they use for it. It's because now you're in the real world, and now you step out of the real world into this other world. So they literally have you, as you read, stepping out of the real world and into it. So it's a way, it's a tool to help you suspend that disbelief and leave that criticism, that critical mind, back in that room where there was a wardrobe, so to speak.
Stargate.
Not just Stargate. I mean,
Stargate. That's another.
Yeah.
I mean, there's literally hundreds of books. Like it's a whole subgenre of fantasy. I wasn't even aware of it, till recently that was the term. But I'm like, oh, well, that makes a great deal of sense. And I started. Stargate was the first one I thought of.
Okay, yes, you've got me there. But since I've just binge-watched Wheel of Time recently, I've thought of that because they're also walking through portals. So,
I mean, Doctor Who.
Yes,
like it's been around forever. So people have been doing it for a long time. One of my favorite ones, I didn't know it was portal fiction, was the Thomas Covenant series, because that was introduced me at such a time that I wasn't really steeped in fantasy fiction at that point.
And do you think that as a fantasy author, or dealing also with myth and so on, you have to be aware of history, mythology, religion as well, to put it right?
Oh, very much so. Because very much so. I think all those things are where you kind of create the foundation for making the story real, because those are the things that societally that we kind of understand already. So you have a foundation there that you can build on top of. You can find a way to twist it or to meet your story, then it's going to seem just that much more less foreign to the reader than if you just kind of summon it out of nothingness. I mean, like the fabrication of the Phantom Funeral Coach, the piece of folklore that I created for the story, there's a lot of history behind it. Like if you want to have the number of settlers and what tribe, how they interacted with the indigenous tribes at the time and things like that. Those are all a matter of history. And if you kind of ignore that, then it's not going to ring true at all. Whether the reader realizes it or not, but when you have that foundation, you can build up from there. And like those are also things that you can kind of pull from that most readers are already familiar with, like specifically like with like even like the Percy Jackson series by Rick Riordan. Those things, we're kind of familiar with it, so he gets to play with those. But it's familiar enough to us that he can have an instant connection, but it's also not so familiar that he can't play with it.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that fantasy authors have to read even more than, let's say, crime fiction authors?
No, I think that if you're a crime fiction author, I think you've got a really rough road to go. You better know the procedures. You better know the science. And so I think you don't get to skirt too far outside of reality, because as a fantasy writer, you can do something completely outlandish. And when somebody complains about it, you can go, well, it's fantasy. As a writer, you can't do that. You can't say like, well, that gun doesn't even exist. It's like, well, you're right. You kind of just have to capitulate to the criticism there. So I think writing in reality is actually, I don't want to say it's harder, but it's definitely, it has less freedom.
Yeah. Yeah, I imagine it. And Daniel, now that you also write for children and young adults, what about the adults? What can the adults expect from you in the future or in the near future?
So I think the last time I was on, I was talking about I have a paranormal thriller coming out. I'm spring 2024. I'm in the drafting stages, the editing stages of that right now. So that will be coming out. We're still kind of hammering out the title and all the other details on that. But because I wrote this one with the character in mind, and I'm not naming it after the character. So it's going to be, at this point, a planned trilogy. And so that's set in modern times, which is a weird thing for me to do so far. And it's a contemporary. It's got small science fiction elements because there's a technology in it that doesn't exist. But it's pretty much going to be based in reality to some degree. Of course, it's going to be just a little bit spooky because I just can't separate my work from that portion of who I am. So that's my plan for spring of 2024 for the adults, fall 2024 for the kids, the next books in the Aristotle series, and then spring of 2025, sequel to Life is in the Blood, which will be expanding that world hugely. So I'm working under a title, and I'm calling the series Cathedral Covenant. So it's going to expand out into a series. So that's what I've got going on.
That's good.
There's also 2 free prequels out there for anybody. I also did 2 free prequels for anybody out there who wants to kind of get in front of Life is in the Blood. One's written like a dime novel for Sheriff Flynn. It's actually about his first meeting with Silas, and then The Haunting of McMurtry Manor is the book that Brannigan Rafferty turned into his publisher in Life is in the Blood. Those are both out there. If someone subscribes to my newsletter, they can get them both for free.
Nice to hear that.
Good to know.
Absolutely. I get the impression that you love to, like last time also, that you like to span more than one genre in your writing. I
do. Absolutely. I don't like to be like, I guess it's just a personality quirk. I don't like to be hemmed into just one thing. I don't want to just scare people. I want people to have fun while they're reading a book. I think while some people might not enjoy that as much if they're like specifically into the horror genre, or they don't necessarily like, I just want people to have fun. I want, when you read it, to be an adventure You feel like you've gone on a journey. You feel satisfied with the outcome of the adventure, and it should have some bumps and scares along the way.
Now, suppose that one of your books is taken up by, let's say, Amazon, Apple TV, or Netflix. What would be your thoughts on that? Would you try to be part of the process, or would you say, "Oh, give me the money, you have the book, I'm leaving"?
I mean, honestly, I do think about that. I mean, not that maybe it will ever happen, but it's scary to me to give away the reins completely to the book. I would want like at least some kind of say of the direction. Like, because for me, like if they took Life is in the Blood, you can do whatever you want with it. I just don't. I'm not into like. I wouldn't want it to get the HBO treatment. I don't want it to be, turned into like Game of Thrones where there's soft core in it, all the way through it. I don't want that. That's the level of control I want. I just kind of want to control, that because I want everybody to be able to enjoy it. I don't want to kind of, I don't know. I just don't want that. Other than that, I think I would pretty much just treat my babies as good as you can. But here you go.
Okay. Any ideas on possible actors? Suppose it happens.
For which one?
Whichever you prefer.
So, Life is in the Blood. If I could have Sheriff Flynn be Denzel Washington, that would be really cool. Kenneth Branagh is a little too old to be Brannigan, but that was kind of my thought when I was writing it. Silas, I don't know. You just have to be someone that's willing to be a little bit more sinister. I don't know, or Miriam or Rose for that matter. But I think that Flynn and Brannigan, I had like a clear vision of what what the actors would be if they ever played them after discussing it.
Now that you said sinister, what if we turned Silas into a woman?
I mean, it could happen. I mean, it might happen.
I
don't want to give too much away.
No. Just just thinking of sinister, doing sinister. There will be quite a few female actors who can do sinister quite well. Scary.
And scary.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm gonna say, like, you remember Rose? She's still out there.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And Daniel, is there anything else you would like our listeners to know?
If you're interested in finding me, I'm on Instagram. My handle is @TheBautzy. You want to get the free prequels to Life is in the Blood, you can go to my website, danielbautzctp.com or danielbautz.com. Either one will get you there. Sign up for the newsletter. You'll get a link to a Rampage on Red Ranch, and within that book, there's a link to Haunting of McMurtry Manor. So you'll be able to get both of them for free. And then hopefully you'll decide that you want to read Life is in the Blood.
Okay, absolutely. You should absolutely read that. Also, Aristotle, James, and the Phantom Funeral Coach. If you have children, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, read it, buy it. I mean, like I said, it's the perfect timing because it's the perfect Halloween read. I suppose book 2 is also planned like that?
Yes, it'd be fall of 2024. So it'll be out there.
Yeah. Okay.
Book 2, I think I've got the first 5 books of those planned. So I've got 2 written. Be working on 3 here, probably starting spring of 2024.
5 books, like I said. Harry, move aside.
More to come.
Yep. Aristotle is on the way. Well, absolutely. I mean, they're always looking, children and adults are always looking for something good to read. That's a perfect read. I mean, it covers again more than just the spooky thing. Yeah. It's also about friendship, family, good, evil, and like we said, evil is not that evil.
And there's a normal life as a teenager.
Yes, exactly.
Leave school and so on.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, that was the point. I mean, I don't want to just give you a kind of. I want 3-dimensional stories. I don't want the kind of flat. I don't want people reading and going, well, that didn't have any depth to it. Because the best stories do. That's why you go back to them.
Exactly.
Why I still read Jacob Tutu and the Hooded Fang.
Yeah, and you want to keep on reading. It's the same with your adult book. I mean, life is in the blood.
Yeah.
What's next? What's next? What's next? You can't put it down because you want to know what's going to happen next.
And that's always the hope. That's always when I'm writing. I'm like, I want people to turn the pages. I don't want them going, so what? I want them going, what's next?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's so amazing to hear you say that.
Yeah, it's true. And like I said, I absolutely enjoyed the new one as well, even as an adult.
Yeah.
Yeah, not just for the children, also for us adults.
That's the feedback I've been getting. Even the adults bought it for their kids, and then they read it. They're like, oh, this is good.
Yep. We absolutely agree.
Yep.
So, Daniel, thank you very much for joining us again. It was an absolute pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me on. And again, it's amazing to have an opportunity to speak with both of you. And get better, Teacup.
Same here. You did enjoy this episode as much as we did? Then hit subscribe and don't miss the next episode. Also, make sure to follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. If you like to support us and buy us a coffee, you can do so via Buy Me a Coffee and other platforms. You can find all the necessary links in the description. Until next time.